Cuthbert was a humble hermit. He was a man who loved animals, who lived with foster parents for part of his life. He was a shepherd, a healer, and after his death, he became one of the most famous and venerated saints in all of England. The reason? His body refused to rot. The body of St. Cuthbert became one of the most important relics in England, and his coffin was opened 6 different times over 1,200 years. Generation upon generation wanted to see if the accounts of Cuthbert's body never decomposing were true. Could it be possible? This is the story of mysteries, miracles, mummification, and what happened to the body of St. Cuthbert. Cuthbert had originally been buried on the tidal island of Lindesfarne in 687. He was incredibly well loved and respected, and his burial was meticulously carried out. When Cuthbert died, it is written that his whole body was washed, his head wrapped in a headcloth, and an oblate placed upon his breast. He was robed in his priestly garments, wearing his shoes in readiness to meet Christ, and provided with a waxed shroud. It seems almost immediately that people began coming to the final resting place of Cuthbert to pray. Miracles of healing began being reported. People wanted to be as close as they possibly could to the saint's relics when they prayed. They believed that the closer they were to the source, the more powerful the possibility of healing. And so it was decided to wait 11 years to allow Cuthbert's body to decompose, and then they would exhume the body and make a shrine for him on the anniversary of his death on March 20th, 698. This would be the declaration of Cuthbert's sainthood. But when they opened the tomb, they were shocked at what they saw. And on the first opening of the sepulchre, they found a thing marvelous to relate, namely that the whole body was undecayed as when they had buried it 11 years before. The skin had not decayed nor grown old, nor the sinews become dry, making the body tautly stretched and stiff. But the limbs lay at rest with all the appearance of life, and were still movable at the joints. For his neck and knees were like those of a living man, and when they lifted him from the tomb, they could bend him as they wished. None of the vestments and footwear which touched the flesh of his body was worn away. A very special reliquary chest had been made to hold the bones of Cuthbert for the occasion, but it wasn't big enough to house the entire body like a coffin. So they had to lay Cuthbert on his side, slightly folded up to fit in what had been made. Word spread throughout England and Europe of the miracle of now St. Cuthbert's incorrupt corpse. A steady stream of people began flocking to the shrine. They left gifts, gold, jewelry, even gifts of land. And after 100 years, the monastery and the island of Lindesfarne had grown wealthy. It was the perfect place to be raided. On June 8th, 793, the Vikings came. Monks were killed. The younger boys among them were taken and sold as slaves. The gold and silver was looted, and finally the monastery was burned. Then for decades, attacks continued. In 875, the monastery was abandoned, and the body of St. Cuthbert was moved again. 7 monks were chosen to protect and carry the body, while the remaining stalwart monks and some villagers brought what was left of the treasures and important relics that had not been destroyed in the Viking raids. The body made its way for the next 7 years until the group established at an old Roman town called Chester-le-Street. The next time the coffin was opened was for Alfred the Great's grandson, Aethelstan, the first king of a united England. He presented the corpse with an array of extremely costly gifts and a copy of St. Cuthbert's life written by the Venerable Bede. Cuthbert's body stayed at Chester-le Street for over 100 years until it was finally moved again and ultimately put in the newly built Great Cathedral at Durham. A brand new shrine was constructed to honor the famous saint and the perceived power of his relics. On the 24th of August, 1104, the tomb was opened again. There had been quite a lot of skepticism floating around by this time. Was St. Cuthbert's body really undecayed? And so, the monks opened the chest, and what they saw shocked them. At last, they raised the lid, and having removed the linen cloth which had covered the sacred relics immediately beneath it, they smelt an odor of the sweetest fragrancy. And behold, they found the venerable body of the Blessed Father, the fruit of their anxious desire, laying on its right side in a perfect state, and from the flexibility of its joints representing a person asleep rather than dead. It was written that the monks physically touched Cuthbert's skin, raised and lowered the body, and they were aghast. And so, St. Cuthbert's body was again interred. By the time Henry VIII enacted his dissolution of monasteries, Durham and the lavish shrine of the hermit's body was a prime target for destruction. Relics like St. Cuthbert were seen as idolatrous and superstitious, symbols of the Catholic faith that Henry had broken away from. 3 officials, a goldsmith, and a valuer came to take anything of value and destroy the shrine. Off the men went to their work in December of 1539, and Cuthbert's tomb was opened again. These men, so intent on destruction, found, like many before them, a complete shock. The goldsmith did take a great forehammer of a smith and did break the said chest, and when they had opened the chest, they found him lying whole, incorrupt, with his face bare and his beard as yet had been a fortnight's growth, and with all of his vestments upon him as he was accustomed to say mass withal, and his medwand of gold lying beside him. Then, when the goldsmith did perceive that he had broken one of the legs when he did break open the chest, he was very sorry for it, and did cry, "Alas, I have broken one of the legs." The men immediately stopped their plunder, and instead of burning the body or throwing it away, they left it. The body of St. Cuthbert then sat in the open air for 2 years, until they dug a grave beneath where the former shrine had been and laid the body to rest. A few hundred years passed, and again the fascination with the incorrupt corpse returned, this time in 1827, when a Protestant librarian decided he wanted to prove that the incorrupt corpse of Cuthbert was a myth and had always been a myth. History tells us this librarian most likely did not have approval from the cathedral to do this investigation. And when he does do it, he admits that part of the investigation was hastily done through from over-anxiety to reach at once the real object of our curiosity. What he found was exactly what he wanted to. And after what we know of what happened to the body, its sitting out for 2 years would be exactly what you would expect. He found a skeleton, not an incorrupt corpse. The many items that were in the coffin were removed, and again, Cuthbert was reburied. The final opening of his tomb would be 1,211 years after his death. In March of 1899, an official investigation and post-mortem was made of the remains. What they found was a bit of a mess left by the previous opening: a skull and a group of miscellaneous bones. But most interestingly, they found evidence of mummification, which would be consistent with descriptions of skin being on Cuthbert's frame. At the end of the investigation, the sacred relics were once more laid to rest. And there lies Cuthbert, to this day, at Durham Cathedral. And still tens of thousands of people come every year to see the tomb of the humble hermit whose life and body has garnered fascination for centuries.